No applause? Oh. So my name is Jeff, and I want to start off and just say this will hopefully be fun and entertaining, but I want to take us to a dark place right off the bat. What if I told you that my mother died when she was shot by her boyfriend and I was 3 years old? Sounds kind of dark, right? How many people would be interested to know a little bit more about that story? Okay. So we'll come back to that. So I'm one of those guys that hates to read slides to people, or I hate when presenters read slides to you. I'll probably look from time to time to make sure I don't get lost. But I'm going to rely on you to look less at your smartphones. I see Michelle. I'm just joking. Or... and just look here. So just by a show of hands, how many people would say, yes, I agree with this statement? Sorry, that's the wrong question. Wrong slide. I guess I should read it more often. But who does not want more donors? Does anybody not want more donors? Yeah, everybody wants more donors? So raise your hands if you want more donors. Okay, good. Okay, everybody's awake. All right. So how many people are challenged with their messaging and their marketing? Would you say that you are just drop dead certain that what you're saying and who you're saying it to is definitely finding its mark and you're 100% good in that area? Anybody want to raise their hands on that one? Okay, cool. All right. So first off, at Forefront Studios, just one of the things that we want to show there, we want to give some love to some of the nonprofits that we work with. We work with organizations, businesses, startups, but we do a lot of work with nonprofits. And so we know you, we get you. And so that we have a belief system around the nonprofits. We know that there are some amazing causes. And we're hopeful that through this presentation that you'll gain some more information and that it's going to help you with your marketing and telling your story. So let me start off and ask you, if I gave you two words, I'm just going to throw out two random words. What if I said goat and muffin? They have nothing to do with each other, right? All right. But maybe in your mind, if you're like me anyway, how many people are going, did a goat eat a muffin? Did a goat steal a muffin? You're making up a story in your mind about that, right? So we are hardwired for story. It's kind of how we have always existed. And you know, when you think about just so many different ways that story enters our mind, there's this piece of us psychologically that's always wanted to take in story to tell story. And so it so happens that there's this psychology about how storytelling affects the brain. There's dopamine that's released, there's cortisol that's released, there's oxytocin that's even released, which is kind of odd because that's usually what they use to help women with childbirth. Not like I would know that. But the storytelling and the psychology is something that's very, very keen. And I'm telling you some of this because it kind of helps lend credence then to what story is all about. So one of the things that we find in as time goes on is that trust with marketers really is shrinking. We don't really know who to believe anymore sometimes. Somebody can make a claim, a statistic, but you're like, I don't really know if I want to believe that or not. But what we find when you go back into the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even probably through today, a lot of the marketing that was done was all about pushing information to people, right? I make washers and dryers, so I want you to buy these. And there's billboards and there's other magazine ads, and it's just pushing information our way. 3,000 messages a day is what we're getting is the latest statistic. But storytelling is typically something where you can begin to read an article or watch a movie or whatever, and you're like, oh, I kind of like this, so instead of clicking off, I'm going to pull it to me, I'm going to listen to it. And so that's where some of the magic of story begins. So there's a pretty cool study that I came across just last week where on a college campus there were 378 participants, and a surveyor went up to them and said, hey, there's this crisis in Africa, and they gave them some more information. And then they said, here is an envelope, and you do with it what you want. And inside that envelope was 5 $1 bills, and then in half of the envelopes there were facts about this crisis in Africa. And then in the other half of the envelopes, there was a story about a 9-year-old and her starving in Africa. So they found the results, or actually to find the results, what they did is they calculated the amount of money that people had given based on whether they were told a story or whether they were told facts. So it should come as no surprise, since I'm talking about story, that the average person gave $1.17 when they were told facts, but those who were told a story gave $2.83. So then the researchers said, well, wait a second, what if we combine story with facts? What would happen then? Would it go up? And it did go up, but only to $1.43 from just the facts alone. So obviously what the survey concluded was that if you tell story, the impact is much greater than if you try to play with facts and figures. So if you use story properly, then you should get more donors, more volunteers, and more love from your community. And that's the end of the conversation, or so you think. So it's easy to say we should use story, but first we need to understand story. So my good friend Yoda came up with this quote. Actually, this was written by ChatGPT last night. I said, what would Yoda say? And so this is what Yoda and ChatGPT came up with me. So what we're going to do now is we're going to shift and we're going to explain the contents and the story and the whole framework around this. And I will not lie, this is directly taken from an author named Donald Miller and his book, StoryBrand. So if you've not read that book, I highly recommend it. And this is what we use at Forefront Studios for the vast majority of the work that we do, is we engage our clients with story because we know it's such a powerful vehicle. So we're going to go through all of these elements. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to talk about how story is used in movies, and that kind of helps explain the framework. And then we're going to talk about how you can then borrow this framework for your nonprofit. So let's talk about the character first. So this is where story starts, and we're going to use 3 examples because not everybody has seen Star Wars or not everybody's seen Harry Potter. But we've got Luke Skywalker, we've got Harry Potter, we've got Katniss Everdeen, and these are the main characters within their movies. And hopefully everybody has seen these, I hope. So a story isn't really a story unless there's conflict and unless there's desire. So if we go back to Luke, let's see, we went too far there. For those of you who have seen Star Wars, so here Luke at the beginning of the story, he's hanging out on this planet and he's farming with his uncle. And what if that's all that we know about Luke? And I mean, nothing happens. So we need conflict, we need desire, and that's what occurs in really, really good movies. Like, for example, pretend that you go home to your spouse, you're like, hey, guess what I did today? I had a drink of lemonade at the Nonprofit Network. Wow. Well, what else happened? I don't know. That's really it. Like, oh, great story. So you need conflict and desire, and that's what happens in the movies. That's how things kind of evolve. So here's what happens when we add problem and conflict into the story. So Luke wants to get off of the planet and become a Jedi Knight. Harry wants to become a wizard. And Katniss Everdeen wants to get away, wants to save her sister, and she wants to figure out how to survive in the Hunger Games. Now, one thing I want you to understand, or what I hope that you'll see, is first off, we don't believe in cursing on stage. After this, we might curse a little bit. But you'll see that there's a little bit of a pattern here, and that's very intentional. You're going to see this over and over again. And what's going to happen in the next 10 minutes is I'm going to ruin most movies, books, and TV shows that you'll see. Not all, but most. Because there's this formula that happens in good storytelling. So this problem that exists for most of our characters that we just saw is they have an external issue which leads to an internal issue which leads to a philosophical issue. And we'll come back to that in a second. So we have a character, they have a problem. In the movie, what do? If they don't do anything at all, if they have this problem and they don't go anywhere with it, then they're stuck. And so they need a guide. So here is what that guide looks like. Luke has Obi-Wan, Harry has Professor Dumbledore, and Katniss Everdeen has Woody from Cheers, if you remember him, right? And so this is where our hero gets help. Now our hero gets help from the guide because they have two big major characteristics about them. They have empathy and they have authority. So if you read the phrasing behind there, all of these individuals have that empathy and authority, so our character is in good hands. They're going to help evolve the story a little bit. So now we have a character with a problem. They go to the guide, and now the guide has to reveal this plan to them. And so here is the three-step plan that each of the guides gave our heroes. Kind of similar. Obi-Wan says, hey, I got this lightsaber, and Professor Dumbledore says, hey, I got this wand. I'm going to show you how to use it. Of course, Katniss becomes better because she's got this bow and arrow. But they all have a plan that makes it really simple. So in the movies, if we give our characters too much of a plan, they're not going to be able to cover it. Like if you think about anything, what if Obi-Wan said, hey, Luke, you're a little overweight. We're going to need you to lose some weight, and I think you've got some issues there. You probably need to go see a psychiatrist. I mean, there's just too much going on. So we want to make sure that we have a very finite set of situations that are in the plan. So our character, they have a problem. They go to a guide who gives them a plan, and now they need to be called into action because they have these skills, but now we need to tell them it's time to take action. And we'll get into transitional in just a second, but we're just going to deal with direct for right now. So here's the call to action for each of our heroes. Luke has to take down the Empire. Poor Harry, he's got to take on the guy that we can't really say his name. And then Katniss is going to have to survive with help of the sponsors. So that's how they're kind of called into action. So one thing that always kind of helps in the movies is there has to be some table stakes. Like they understand that I've got to be called into action, but like, what if I don't take action? What happens then? Or what if I do take action? What does that look like? So we're going to tease that out a little bit. So if Luke and Harry and Katniss take action, this is what success looks like for them. Right? They're going to save the worlds. They're going to be able to hang out with their friends, yada, yada, yada. And then the failure side of it is, oddly enough, if they all fail, they all die, right? Nobody's crying? That's all sad news there. Thankfully, they didn't die, though, if you saw the movies. So what happens then is, underneath this, all of this is there's this transformation that our characters take in most movies, where at the beginning, they're this way, and by the end of it, they're this way, right? So we have, for example, if we showed Luke, he went from this farmer with his uncle, and now by the end, he's this Jedi Knight. And then for those of you that follow Star Wars like me, he becomes much, much more than that, right? Same with Harry, and Katniss too. So, here's the question I would ask you is if this framework can generate millions and millions of dollars for movies, why can't it generate money for you? And we can list off so many movies that follow this framework. Would you like one? Additional one? Rocky Balboa. Rocky has this problem. He wants to be a better boxer, and he wants to feel himself. And he's got this girlfriend, Adrian, and now he gets challenged by Apollo Creed. And what's going to happen? I need some help. What's he do? He finds Mickey, this rough and gruff trainer. And what's the trainer do? Here's your plan, Rocky. Chase this chicken around, run through the streets of Philadelphia, and just go old school in your training. And then what's going to happen now? If you fight, you could die, because Apollo Creed's pretty tough, but you'll win the hearts and minds of everybody. And if you fail, you'll just go back to who you are. And oddly enough, Rocky still loses, at least in the first movie, but he wins the hearts and minds of everybody that's in the stadium. Cinderella is another one. There's so many of these stories that follow this framework, and it's the way we're wired to take in story. And we watch these movies over and over again, and we're like, yes, I love this movie, but inside your brain's probably going, gosh, there's something familiar about this. And so now you know some of the secrets. And so now let's talk about, now that we understand story, let's talk about understanding your story. So now what we're going to do is we're going to reverse engineer this framework, and we're going to talk about how this can work for your nonprofit. So let's start with the character. Who is the hero? Who's the character in your story? Well, it's certainly not the three people, but it's your donor. That's the person that you want to reach out to. That's the person that you want to get some money from, right? You want to keep your funding going. But there's actually two heroes in a nonprofit. It's the mission itself, and it's also the donor. Now, when we say mission, that could be the clients that you serve. It could be the volunteers, could be, staff. But your volunteers and your staff and your clients, they have different needs, and they have different messaging needs than a donor does, right? You're not going to ask your staff, would you give us money? Because they want to get paid sometimes. So it's important that in your messaging that you will oftentimes have several audiences, and it's important to know that your messaging can't be a one-size-fits-all. You need to have messaging for your different audiences. So here is the problem matrix, if you will, the external, the internal, and the philosophical. And again, I'm not going to read all these off to you. If you want a copy of this deck, let me know after. But you can see that the problems are different. And if we just focus on the donors for a second, what does a donor desire? Well, a donor desires to make meaning. They want purpose. They've done well in life. They have some extra cash on hand, and they want to make sure that that money is going to go someplace where their legacy maybe would live on. And so we want to dig into that a little bit with the messaging and talk with them about that. And so that's where, again, if we go back to story doesn't really exist without conflict and without a problem. We need to talk about that with our donors. I know how you feel. It kind of sucks that you made this money and you don't know where to give it. Well, we'll take it, and this is what we're going to do with it. So you really want to lean into the problem with your donors or with your mission. So the guide in this story, this is where everybody marketing-wise kind of gets it wrong. If you drive down the highway and you take a look at billboards as an example, you'll see realtors, you'll see lawyers, you'll see doctors, and what do you see on those billboard images? I'm your orthopedic surgeon and I fix bones, right? That's kind of what you see. It's all about them. It's not about the patient necessarily. So the thing that you want to make sure that am I missing a slide? Here we go. The one thing you want to make sure that you realize is that you are the guide in this framework or story. You are not the hero. The hero is the mission. The hero is the donor. And by lifting them up and making them, pretend like we're Lion King. I'm holding out baby Simba, right? That's my donor right there. I want to make sure that everybody's looking at them and they feel loved and desired and embraced. And you are the guide, and you're kind of in the background just a little bit. So the part that's kind of cool, that framework that we showed you about how it works in the movies with Obi-Wan and Professor Dumbledore and Woody from Cheers, is they all had empathy and they had authority, and that's what makes them a great guide. Well, you too as the nonprofit have empathy and authority for a variety of reasons. And another way to think about authority is experience. What experience do you have? So how many years have you been around? What awards have you won? How many clients have you served? All of this is the authority and the experience that you have. And the empathy is really easy to talk about with your donors or with your mission, because most nonprofits came into existence because they saw a need and you're fulfilling it. So that part is super easy for you to figure out your messaging on. So one thing, in case anybody is looking at their smartphones right now, is that let's just take a real quick pause and let's just remember a couple of things that are so true. Every marketer talks about themselves and their messaging. And that's one thing that you can definitely be different on if you adopt this framework. You'll definitely stand out from the crowd when you focus on your audiences, not just your audience. Now, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, the big names out there, they can just put out an ad about polar bears skiing and whatever, and there's this self-implied message that you should drink the product, but we don't have that kind of money. We are not a household name in a nonprofit world. So we need to make sure that the messaging that we put out has a specific call to it, that it's speaking directly to an audience. And the last thing I would have you think about is If I own a computer company, what am I going to say about my computers? Am I going to say bad things about them? Of course not. I'm going to say nothing but great things about them. But are you going to take my word for it because you know that I'm going to say great things about them? Instead, what we need to do is have our hero talk for us. So if we use the example of Amazon, when you go to buy anything on Amazon, I don't know about you, but I read reviews, right? And we look at the stars, and the stars are based on what the consumer says about my product. So that is the mentality that you want to go through with this type of storytelling is don't tell your story yourself. Have your advocates tell the story for you. Have existing donors tell the story for you. Have board members, have the clients that you're serving, have them tell the story for you. So just like where the guide in the movies, they had a 1, 2, 3 step plan. You too need to be thinking about how many steps are you having your clients, your donors, your volunteers, how many steps are they having to take to engage with you? Because if it's too many, they're probably going somewhere else. An example I've given to people is I was watching a commercial once and they were talking about this chocolate chip cookie that had 98 processes in it. I'm like, I don't care. Does it taste good? That's all that's important to me. Tell me where I can go buy it. So we want a simple plan for you, for example, would be, visit our website, learn more about what we do, donate or volunteer or something along those lines. Super, super simple. Okay, so now let's talk about that call to action. So before I talked about in the movies, there's usually this direct call to action. But when you are in a nonprofit space or in the business space, there's actually a transitional call to action. So the example that you see up there is kind of goofy, but it's true. Like, let's say that I've met my wife for the first time and I walk across the room and I say, hey babe, you want to get married? And she's like, whoa, you're coming on too strong and I got to call 911, right? She's like, no. I'm like, well, okay, so you're not ready to get married yet, that direct. How about we go on a date? All right, you're kind of creepy, but okay. And so we get to the end of the date. I'm like, hey, you want to get married? And she's like, nah, not really. All right, well, you want to go on another date? Sure. So this scenario here is very similar to what we want to do with your messaging is, hey, if you want to donate, visit our website. If you're not ready to do that right now, we understand, but sign up for our newsletter or take a look at these videos on our website. Get them, into that mix, if you will. And then at that point in time, when they're ready to make a choice, then they're going to, and hopefully they'll go with you. So just like, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here in my head a little bit. Just like with the outcomes that we saw our heroes go, we also need to tell our audiences the success that will happen if they work with you or the failure if they don't. And so if you think about a cake recipe, cake has sugar, but it also has salt. But you want to put a lot of sugar in your cake recipe, but just a little bit of salt, not too much. And that's just like success and failures. You want to give people a lot of reasons why they'll win if they decide to work with you or donate with you. But if they fail, you do definitely want to tell them that. You just don't want to coat it on too thick. So here's the transformation then that we assume that we're going to make with those that we work with. And really what we're looking for as we're trying to build out our messaging for a nonprofit is, what is the aspirational identity of not only our client that we serve, but maybe our volunteer and then maybe our donor too. So when you look at your website, what is the imagery that you're showing on your website? What are the videos that you may be putting out there? And are they showing people something that they want to be themselves, so that's why they engage with you, or are they showing something else? So this is that transformation then that we want to borrow from, is we want to take people from where they're at today to where they're going to be, and we definitely want to show them what they're going to be. All right, so one last thing, and I see this all the time. you look at anybody's Facebook pages or TikTok or whatever, is we tend to get away from our core competencies and we get into these trends and we start showing pictures of kitties playing the piano. And unless you're, I know there's some people here from the Humane Society, unless you're them, you should not be doing this because people have a problem. You've identified the problem and now you're showing cats and like, well, what's going on here? Like, I thought they were supposed to be talking about me. Janet Jackson, what does she say? What have you done for me lately? Of course, that was like 15 years ago. Gosh, I'm so old. What, 20? Oh, geez. All right. So this is one thing to be mindful of is that donor, that client, that volunteer, be talking about them and don't be crazy about kitty cats and things like that. All right, so I started, okay. There's one thing that I am, I'm very empathetic. So some of these projects we do, it just hits hard. So right now I want to share with you a story, and I told you about someone, or I told you a story about my mother dying, and she was killed by her boyfriend at 3. That didn't happen to me, but it did happen to Liza. So hopefully our technology will work, and I can show you that story.
When I was 3, my mom was killed by her boyfriend. They were into drugs. He was part of a motorcycle gang. He called my mom's friend before he called 911. And when the coroner had finally got there, they said the rigor mortis had set in for 5 hours. She was going to leave her boyfriend. She never left her boyfriend. She was going to go to Sioux City, Iowa, start a new life with me. She never came to pick up me. So with that, my dad raised me. He did the best that he could, but he also had a meth problem and a drinking problem. So he did not know how to deal with the loss of my mom. You know, even though they weren't together, he still cared for her a lot. And now he's just got me by himself. You know, he had his drug problem, drinking problem. So I kind of knew when he was coming down. I had to stay in my room because he would be very angry. If I stayed out, you know, if the streetlights came on, he would drive through the neighborhood, look for me. And if I didn't get in the door soon enough, he would kick me with his steel-toed boots. My dad was always on meth. So living with him, like, I felt like the wrong parent had died, you know? And everybody tells me these great stories about my mom, but it's not the same. You know, and I get jealous of people that have memories of her because I don't have those. She was just taken from me. Me getting myself put in placements or getting locked up is how I felt that I was being taken care of. I always felt safe. I never wanted to be home. When I came to VOA, ILP, ILPP, TLP, the staff had always been very kind. I don't know where I would have gone without VOA. I had nowhere to go when I was 15 or 17. So in my time of need, somebody was finally there for me. So when the kids come here, they're 16 to 21-year-olds. I don't care if they're 21, they're still a kid to me. But they come here, you know, to transition into a new life. Some could be like me, they just don't have anywhere to go. Some of us just need some extra direction and, you know, and that's just what we're here for. Help them be responsible adults, take care of themselves. Some kids have addiction problems, you know, that they need to work through. So we get them set up. We also have our addiction counselor here, Chris. Great team. We always just make sure that they get the right direction and nobody is left behind. I can't describe like how alone I had felt. So I know that there are some of these kids, you know, I hear their stories with their hard relationships with their parents, or like I understand. I making them feel safe is probably the most important thing to me.
All right, if you were watching this at home, would you have gotten choked up? Somebody is out there shaking their head yes, right? All right. So you can see kind of why, I mean, I've seen this I don't know how many times, and it still gets me every time. So pretend if you heard her story through facts versus getting to really hear her story. Bam, it just hits you. And I know there's stories in this room. I know that you have clients that you serve, stories can be told. They can be just as powerful. But let's dissect real quickly, and then we can open this up to questions. Who's the hero of the story? Well, Liza is, obviously. And there's things that we didn't have time to talk about. But she went through her entire life thinking that her mother had died of a suicide. And it wasn't until she was 22 years old that she found out the truth that her boyfriend, or her mom's boyfriend, had killed her. So imagine going through your entire, childhood thinking that your mother had killed herself and what that would do to you, right? I mean, talk about problem and desire. It doesn't get any more than that. So she lived her entire life with why, and she was looking for love. And a problem, her mother died. And so externally, of course, that's horrible. Internally, that really got to her. And philosophically, every child deserves to have their parents. So who came in as the guide? It was Volunteers of American Dakotas. But they've got empathy and authority for many reasons. And the plan was kind of applied. We didn't get to really dig into that, but there's a plan that VOA takes the problem youth through. And so this was shown at the Rise and Shine event just this past couple of months. And so the self-implied call to action was to donate. And so we didn't show that in the video, or it wasn't at the end, but that might be, if this was a freestanding video on its own, that's kind of what we would do, is we would ask people to visit a website, and then they could go ahead and donate. And then, the success of the failure is clearly there. The success that she enjoyed, now she has flipped the script and become a better person. But if she didn't have VOA, where would she be? Probably behind bars. So I like this story a lot because it chokes me up, obviously. But look at the transformation that Liza took. And you have these stories, and they need to be told. They don't have to be, this dramatic, but there's some amazing stories that really need to be told. And if you can harness the power of this type of framework, that's pretty powerful, and it's a great way to kind of reinvigorate some of your marketing. So your next steps would be I saw many of you taking notes, I appreciate that, is to take a look at your website, take a look at the messaging, take a look at anything that you've got. What are we doing as we're talking to our audiences? And then I would implore you to refresh that so that you can attract people to what you do and the great causes that you serve. And if you have any questions with that, that's what we do. That's what we're all about at Forefront Studios. Is we really want to help those folks. There's another great story. I wish we had time that we did with an individual that had drug addiction issues brought on by her older sister, and she wanted to spend more time with her sister, and the way that she could do it was to do drugs with her sister. And it's another really powerful story. Those stories are out there, and those need to be told. We need to bring those out to the light, and that way, great guides like yourselves can get the credit and grab the love of the community and the volunteers and the donors. So that is all I have. So does anybody have any questions? Yes.
I'm Deb Butler with Empire Mental Health Support. board members or your audience or your donors? I mean, whose story is it that you should be telling?
So you want to go back and, who is the audience, right? So like who do you specifically serve?
People with mental health issues.
Okay, so in some cases, those individuals may not want to go on camera, right? There's the stigma, so I don't want to do that. So what you could do is you could have family members or friends go on. I had a friend who suffered from this, and I saw them go through this. And so they could be the stand-in for you on the hero side of things. So that would be a different approach.
I mean, is it fair to say that you start forming your story based on the outcomes that you want to achieve on the backside? So if your hope is to attract more people to use the services of your organization, you'll construct your story differently than if your hope is to get a donor to give to your organization.
That's very fair to say. Look at that outcome. What's that transformation is really a great place to start. Any other questions? Yes?
That's my question. We just get permission to tell stories.
I'm sorry?
I'm at United Way in Aberdeen, and we get permission to tell stories. So we ask, are we allowed to share this story with your name? Can it be shared anonymously? We get different versions of being able to share a story.
Sure.
And the ones that are anonymous, we have had them and I work together to write it out and then being read by someone too.
Yeah, so this doesn't have to be on video. I mean, obviously, that's what we do, but
The anonymous people that there is still ways to be able to possibly share their story
yeah, absolutely.
in a consensual way.
Absolutely. And you could change the names if you had to, things like that. But yeah. Yes?
So I work in the Humane Society, so obviously the animals aren't able to tell their own stories. We just kind of do that for them, this dog came in completely malnourished and blah, 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 and then, through TLC and medical care, it was able to get adopted to a family. Is that kind of how you...
Yeah, I think you could have your staff possibly could tell the story, but you could have who's the dog's parents. And then, they could get some of the story from your staff, and then they tell the story of, when Trixie was found and they had this and this. Yeah, that's really powerful. And then what you show then is the success metric is now Trixie, the poodle, is playing with your family. Your daughter is cuddling up on Trixie. And I mean, that's pretty powerful. And then you call Sarah McLaughlin and you say, hey, just Oh, totally. I'll tell you, on my social media, I think it was on TikTok. I hate to admit I looked through that. I get these horrible pet videos all the time. Like, why? How did I do this? But I can't stop watching them because I want to see what they're going to do with this dog they found in a pile of oil. Yes?
I have a question about, you mentioned ChatGPT with your Yoda comment.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how effective resources like that are in helping nonprofits and small nonprofits tell their story. Where does that fit in now?
I will let Patrick answer that question. But yeah, there is a way that you'll undoubtedly begin to start to use AI to tell that story. And I'll put this disclaimer out there. There are many other different ways of telling story, and there are many other, and we're kind of, my partner Vince and I back there, we're kind of story nerds, and there are many others out there, but there's science behind the StoryBrand framework. JJ, I can't think of his last name, he's kind of the chief of staff, and he actually got his PhD and he did a dissertation on StoryBrand. And what he found is they tested this framework with nonprofits, for-profits, big companies, little companies, multinational companies, and the only time it didn't work is if they didn't execute it. So it works because it's based on how we're hardwired for story. Yes?
What was the name of the book you were reading?
StoryBrand. It's all one word. StoryBrand by Donald Miller. Any other questions?
That was going to be my question of when doesn't it work, or what are some of the challenges that people run into with it, and I'm curious your answer to that, other than not executing and not just doing it.
So we have a client, I won't say who obviously, they enjoy talking about themselves and the business, and I mean, if they don't want to do it, that's okay. I can't guarantee results if you don't, well, I can't guarantee results anytime actually, but But you're not going to be able to employ a framework if you don't adhere to those policies. And so if you are one of those individuals who's just so egotistical that all you got to do is talk about yourself, well, imagine, and we use this example when in our workshops is, so let's pretend like you're a plumber and I own an apartment and I meet you at a chamber mixer and you start talking to me about this new faucet that you want to sell me, and you just talk and talk and talk and talk. And as he talks, he's literally handing me bowling balls. And after a while, I'm like, God, I can't carry this burden. This guy's wasting my time. And I live in an apartment, and I don't need his services. He's just wasted my time and his. And so that's what happens when we don't talk about the problem that somebody else is having. And that's how businesses of all types waste enormous amounts of money, is they just talk about themselves. Yes?
Remember who the hero of the story is,
Exactly.
not you.
I like what you talked about with the kind of have two target markets, two target audiences.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think places can get a disconnect though between the two, and they talk in isolation to donors and then to clients, where there is, I think, somewhat, or you need to at least consider the tone of what you're doing, how if you have a donor talking to your donors,
Mm-hmm.
how that sounds to a client. Sometimes it's kind of offensive,
Mm-hmm.
the way, like a kind of a charity pitying kind of way of talking about, when people talk a lot about like, oh, we do a handout, not a handout. And
Yeah.
what does that look like from a client perspective?
Yeah.
There are a lot of acronyms and stuff. I think like that's something I think a lot of us have to consider in storytelling is like, yes, there are two audiences, but how does that sound? You still have to have a connection.
Yeah. There's definitely some things you can interweave, but you think about how you talk to one person versus how you talk to another. Those are two different audiences, and maybe they've got different political beliefs or spiritual beliefs. So you might water down something here or something over here. It's the same thing. You just want to be real mindful to make sure you're talking, to the way the audience is going to take it in. There's another question over here.
So, JJ, can't remember his last name.
JJ, yeah, I want to say Abrams. That's not it. Peterson. JJ Peterson or Peters?
Okay. Any idea what journal he's written up in?
I don't know, but I do have a copy of that thesis. I'm not making that stuff up.
I'll send you an email.
Okay, I have a copy of that somewhere. It's 90 pages, and I'll be honest, I did not read it.
Did you just look at
I kind of like breezed through it. I've met him, I've talked with him, but my bathroom visits aren't that long, 90 pages. It's too much reading for me.
What are some other tangible ways that organizations can use a story brand framework?
I planted that guy in the back, by the way. Okay, good question, Vince. What's that shirt say? Forefront Studios. Oh, thanks. So the cool thing about this is that obviously we're videographers, so we're giving you some ideas about how you can market with video. But once you put together what we call the story brand framework, you can then use this to reverse engineer and outline or keyframe wireframe is the right word. Wireframe your website. So once you think about your story, the way that a lot of websites are written is a lot of mumbo jumbo. That's another thing I would have you go back and take a look at your website are you using like vague language? Does the imagery convey the transformation that your client or your donor is going to make? Or is it just your building? And how ho-hum is that? We've been around for 80 years, and take a look at our brick and mortar, and we have 27 departments, and we're helping 35 people. Who cares? Talk about me, okay? I'm the hero. Talk about me. So look at your website and ask yourself those questions, and then give more information. And again, the book that Donald Miller goes through, Story Brand's great, and then he has another book that's a follow-up that's called, I've read it, something about marketing. I don't know, you can look up Donald Miller on Amazon and you'll see it. It's a blue cover, and it has all sorts of different ways where you can use this framework to look at all the different aspects of your marketing.
Jeff Pickett, let's give him a hand.
Right.